In 1958, the 8th FIFA World Cup was held in Sweden. Teams from all over the world took part, including Brazil. But at that time, Brazil was not entering the tournament with confidence. The nation was still haunted by painful defeats in the 1950 and 1954 World Cups. The spirit of both the players and the people seemed to have faded. In this tournament, Brazil was set to face the Soviet Union. Commentators doubted them even more when they decided to field the youngest player in the competition, a 17-year-old striker named Edson Nascimento, better known as Pelé. At that point, the world had no idea just how special this teenager truly was. The story then takes us back to 1950. Back then, Pelé was just a 10-year-old boy called Deco, living in Bauru with his family. His father, Dondinho, was a former football player who now worked as a hospital cleaner after his career ended due to injury. His mother, Celeste, worked as a domestic helper. Deco also had 2 younger siblings, Zoka and Maria. Even though he grew up in poverty, Deco never felt ashamed of who he was. He spent his days going to elementary school and shining shoes to earn a little extra money. Whenever he could, he practiced football with his father and his best friends, Tiago, Yuri, and Fofinho. They did not even have a real ball. They used scraps of cloth tied together into a bundle. On July 17, 1950, Brazil faced Uruguay in the World Cup final. The entire country was desperate for victory. Despite being scolded for getting dirty while playing, Deco and his friends secretly climbed onto a rooftop to listen to the match on the radio. The score was tied 1-1. Then, in the final minutes, Brazil conceded a goal. Uruguay won 2-1. The loss crushed the nation. But that day, young Deco made a promise to his father. One day, he would win the World Cup for Brazil, and that promise would change his life forever. This is Pelé, birth of a legend. However, hearing this, Dondinho told Deco to stay away from football and focus on school instead. He did not want his son to suffer the same fate he had. Sometimes Deco helped his mother at work. She worked in the home of a wealthy boy named Jose, who was also the captain of a youth football team called the Kings. While cleaning, Celeste would tell Deco how she met Dondinho when he was still a professional player. She also shared the painful truth about his serious knee injury and how he was dismissed without any compensation. That was why both Dondinho and Celeste were against Deco pursuing football. One day, while Deco was mopping the floor, Jose and his friends walked in with muddy shoes, making a mess. They were talking about an upcoming youth tournament in Bauru. Jose treated it like a joke, but he still planned to compete because a famous former player, Waldemar de Brito, would attend the final to scout new talent for Santos, a well-known football club. Trying to join the conversation, Deco said he wanted to be a great player like his idol, but he mispronounced the name. Instead of saying it correctly, he accidentally said Pelé. From that moment on, Jose and his friends began mocking him with that nickname. Despite the bullying, Deco boldly decided to enter the youth tournament with his friends. At first, they were unsure. Other teams looked strong, especially the Kings. Deco's team had no proper uniforms and no shoes. They played barefoot in simple shirts. Yuri even sewed makeshift uniforms for the team, although Fofinho's outfit ended up too small for him. But even without the best equipment, their unusual and creative skills carried them all the way to the final. They became the laughingstock of the tournament, especially in front of Jose and the Kings. Deco wanted his team to have proper football shoes, but they had no money. So Fofinho came up with a clever but reckless idea. They would steal peanuts, resell them, and use the money to buy shoes. While they were selling the peanuts, Jose showed up and bought some from them. Then the teasing started again. Yuri was mocked for knowing how to sew, Tiago was made fun of for wearing glasses, and Deco kept getting called Pelé over and over. Finally, Deco lost his temper and punched Jose. A fight broke out and things quickly got out of control. When Deco got home covered in bruises, he lied and said his teacher had hit him at school. Celeste was furious and prepared to confront the teacher. Fortunately, Dondinho had already seen the boys fighting earlier. He told Celeste to go to work and said he would handle it. But instead of going to the school, Dondinho took Deco back to the field to continue the tournament. On the way, he gave his son an important lesson. A player who resorts to violence is usually just afraid of losing. Jose was trying to get inside Deco's head before the final. Dondinho told him never to be ashamed of who he was if he truly wanted to become a professional footballer. Deco felt proud to have his father's support, but his teammates were struggling. Tiago removed his glasses to avoid being teased. Fofinho squeezed into a uniform that was too small. Yuri hid his long hair under a cap. and they all forced themselves to wear oversized football shoes that felt uncomfortable. Soon, the final match began. The stands were full, including Waldemar de Brito, but this time, Deco's team could not play freely. They were too distracted by the insults and pressure. The Kings scored 6 goals without any real resistance. Then in the middle of the game, Deco remembered his father's words. He realized he had to accept himself completely. He took off his shoes and embraced the name Pelé. One by one, his friends did the same. Thiago put his glasses back on. Yuri threw away his cap. Fofinho took off the tight uniform. Suddenly, everything changed. They began playing with joy and freedom, showing off beautiful juggling skills and creativity. Deco moved the ball with incredible precision, even guiding it with his head. They fought back and scored 5 goals, but time ran out. The Kings won 6-5. Even in defeat, Deco's performance earned admiration. The crowd chanted the name Pelé. Waldemar de Brito was so impressed that he handed his business card to Dondinho. But the moment of celebration did not last long. The man whose peanuts they had stolen arrived at the field, looking to catch them. Deco and Thiago managed to hide inside a small cave, while Yuri and Fofinho were still being chased. Then heavy rain began to pour. Suddenly, the cave walls collapsed. A landslide buried Thiago, and he did not survive. Deco was devastated. He blamed himself, believing that Thiago might still be alive if they had never stolen the peanuts just to buy new shoes. Celeste tried to comfort her son and promised that things would be different from now on. Dondinho told his wife about Waldemar de Brito being impressed by Deco's talent. But Celeste still refused to let their son pursue football. She could not forget how her husband had been abandoned by his team after a serious injury. She did not want Deco to suffer the same fate, so Deco was asked to focus on school and spend time working with his father at the hospital. Dondinho tried to lift his son's spirits by juggling a mango, showing him that skill could be practiced anywhere. At one point, Deco even saw a newspaper photo of himself and his friends, but none of it was enough to bring back his confidence. Eventually, Deco realized he could not stay stuck in sadness forever. Slowly, he accepted what had happened and began training again with his father almost every day, still using a mango as their ball. 5 years passed and Deco was now 15. After watching him train tirelessly with Dondinho, Celeste finally made a decision. She reached out to Waldemar de Brito using the business card she had kept all those years. Deco was shocked when Waldemar showed up at their home and invited him to try out for Santos. Overwhelmed with emotion, Deco hugged his mother and accepted the offer. Even though money was tight, Dondinho and Celeste did everything they could to support their son's dream. They even asked for early pay from their jobs to cover his travel expenses. Celeste was worried, of course. Deco was only 15 and had never left home before. After saying goodbye to his siblings and parents, he left with Waldemar for the city of Santos. Life in Santos was far from easy. His coach considered his style outdated. Weeks went by without Deco scoring a single goal. The criticism began to affect him. Still, he was allowed to play for the youth team, the lowest level in the club. Every night, he trained alone, trying to follow the techniques his coach taught him. But no matter how hard he tried, he struggled to score, even during penalty kicks. Waldemar often watched him training late at night. One day, feeling defeated, Deco went to the train station, ready to return home. As he waited for the train, Waldemar appeared and stopped him. Deco admitted that he felt inferior to the other players and believed his style was too old and too different. That was when Waldemar explained the deeper reason behind the criticism. He told Deco about the origins of his technique. Back in the 16th century, when the Portuguese brought African slaves to Brazil, many of those slaves escaped into the forests. To protect themselves, they developed a fighting style called ginga, which later became the foundation of capoeira. After slavery was abolished, ginga was banned because it was considered dangerous. Football eventually became a legal way for people to practice those movements without being arrested. However, many blamed ginga for Brazil's defeat in the 1950 World Cup. That was why coaches tried to eliminate it from Deco's game, hoping to avoid repeating the same failure. Waldemar saw it differently. He believed Deco should embrace who he truly was and bring his ginga to the field without fear. After Waldemar walked away, the train finally arrived at the station. Deco stood there for a moment, thinking about everything he had just heard. Instead of getting on that train and going home, he made a different choice. He turned around and went back to Santos to keep training. In his next match, his team was already down 3 goals. Diko was still unsure of himself. At one point, he lost focus and even collided with another player. But then he looked up and saw Waldemar watching from the stands. He remembered the techniques his father had taught him since childhood. That memory gave him clarity. From that moment on, Diko stopped trying to follow the rigid strategies forced on him. He played freely, beautifully, using his ginga style. The entire stadium was stunned. His movements were creative, unpredictable, and full of joy. Even the coach, who once criticized him, wanted him to keep playing that way. In that match, Diko scored 4 goals. From there, his career took off. With his ginga, he climbed into the professional squad and eventually became Santos's top scorer. His rapid success changed his family's life. He bought an oven for his mother and a radio for his father. He even returned home for a short visit. And on that very day, the national team selection for the 1958 World Cup in Sweden was announced. Even though he was only 16, Diko was chosen. He could only sit there in silence, hardly believing what he had just heard. Before heading back to Santos, he met his childhood friend Yuri. He learned that Fofinho had once robbed a store and spent a year in prison, while Yuri had managed to avoid that fate. Yuri was proud of Diko's journey and promised to keep supporting him. Before he left, Dondinho gave his son their old childhood team jersey, now with the name Pelé written on the back. He explained that even though the name started as a joke, it was the name people shouted when Diko scored his first brilliant goal. Dondinho also gave him a final warning. He once played with ginga too, but he allowed doubt to creep in. That hesitation led to the injury that ended his career. He did not want his son to repeat that mistake. At the national team press conference, some Brazilian players acted arrogant and carried the same bullying attitude from their youth. Among them was José from the Kings, who had also made the squad, and now went by the name Mazzola, inspired by his favorite Italian player. During the question session, a journalist asked whether Brazil's ginga could truly defeat European teams. Diko was ready to answer confidently, but he was immediately cut off by the national team coach, Feola. Like Diko's former coach, Feola believed that ginga was dangerous. He thought it could bring back the same humiliation Brazil suffered in 1950. On his very first day as a national team player, Diko received a strict order from Feola not to use ginga again. Feola's mindset was shaped not only by the 1950 final defeat, but also by the chaotic loss to Hungary in the 1954 quarterfinals, when fights broke out and Brazil's image was damaged worldwide. Feola wanted to rebuild Brazil's reputation and win the World Cup in a more disciplined and respectable way, and in his eyes that meant removing ginga from the game. Training continued for a full month. Another Brazilian player, Garrincha, advised Diko to copy José's more European style if he wanted to actually play in the World Cup. But Diko still believed that ginga was the true Brazilian way to play football. One day during practice, he finally dared to use his ginga again. As soon as Coach Feola shouted at him, doubt crept in. His movements became hesitant, half-committed, and that hesitation cost him. He suffered a serious knee injury. His joint was damaged, his leg was wrapped in bandages, and he had to walk with crutches. When his parents heard the news, they broke down in tears. Even so, they continued to support him and reminded him never to give up. On the radio, critics mocked the Brazilian team again and blamed Diko's injury on his so-called street-style technique. Despite his anger, Feola had no choice but to keep Diko in the squad as a substitute. There was simply no time to find a replacement. When the team arrived in Sweden, the media coverage was harsh. Journalists constantly criticized Brazil and treated them like a joke. Meanwhile, Diko focused on recovery. He received treatment from the team doctor and occasionally joined practice, though his knee was still swollen and fragile. Brazil opened their campaign with a 3-0 win over Austria. Then came a goalless draw against England. Unfortunately, 3 Brazilian players were injured in that match, including José, who played as striker. By then, Diko's knee had finally improved. He was pushed into the starting lineup for the next match against the Soviet Union. It was his first World Cup appearance, and he was the youngest player in the tournament. The pressure overwhelmed him. He was so nervous that he threw up and even forgot to tie his shoelaces. When he stepped onto the field, he froze for a moment. Back in his hometown, people gathered to watch the match, including his father, who followed every second with pride. But on the pitch, Diko struggled. He looked awkward and unsure. unable to make a real impact. Still, Brazil managed to win 2-0 and advance to the semifinals against France. In the semifinal, Deco remained at striker, but doubt was still visible in his movements. Brazil led 2-1 in the first half, yet the team's confidence began to slip as France attacked relentlessly. Feeling inferior to Jose, Deco even wished Jose would recover quickly and take his place. But the truth was different. Jose's leg was not injured at all. His problem was mental. He had been trying too hard to play like a European. Eventually, he realized that Brazil's true strength was ginga. Without it, Brazil would look just like any other team. He remembered their childhood match in Bauru, when Deco's ginga had been both beautiful and unstoppable. As the second half began, Deco thought about those words. This time, he chose to trust himself. He brought back his ginga. Soon, he scored his first goal with a stunning half volley. Then he scored again and again. In that half alone, Deco netted 3 spectacular goals, leading Brazil to a dominant 5-2 victory over France and sending them to the final. In the final, Brazil would face the host nation, Sweden. Most analysts believed Brazil was outmatched in almost every way, from experience and tactics to physical strength and even rough play. Sweden had a powerful midfielder named Parling, known for his aggressive style, and he was assigned to mark Deco throughout the match. Faiola struggled to find the right strategy, and at the press conference, Brazil was mocked once again by the Swedish coach. By now, the Brazilian players had started calling Deco by the name Pelé, after Jose told everyone the story behind it. Feeling intimidated by Sweden's reputation, Deco called his father. Dondinho reminded him to stay confident and to lift the morale of his teammates who looked exhausted and discouraged. Wanting to change the atmosphere, Deco gathered the team in the hotel and started casually passing the ball around. Watching them laugh and play together like a family made something click for Faiola. He began to understand that ginga was not just a technique, it was the spirit that united Brazil. It might look wild and unstructured, but it was joyful and beautiful. Faiola finally told his players to forget his previous orders and play freely with ginga in the final. On June 29, 1958, the final between Brazil and Sweden began. Millions around the world watched as Brazil faced the host nation on their own ground. Back in Deco's hometown, people gathered to follow the match, including his childhood friend Yuri and even Fofinho, watching from prison. From the start, Sweden played aggressively. Parling pushed Deco to the ground more than once, even when he was close to scoring, and the referee let it go. Sweden struck first and took the lead. Many believed that the first goal would decide the outcome, but Deco refused to lose hope. He began dribbling without hesitation, using clever feints and smooth ginga movements. Soon, Brazil scored twice. The stadium fell silent in disbelief as Deco and his teammates moved with speed and confidence. They controlled the ball, played with calm and joy, and even smiled as they dominated the game. In that final, Deco scored 2 goals.
Working in perfect harmony. Ladies and gentlemen, something is shifting. Brazil is coming alive. It comes out to challenge the cross. It's Mama!
When the final whistle blew, Pelé, just 17 years old, had led Brazil to a 5-2 victory over Sweden. Brazil had won the 1958 World Cup. For the first time in history, Brazil were world champions. Overwhelmed by the moment, Pelé collapsed on the field. Unable to believe that his childhood promise had come true, his mother celebrated with pride, and his father remembered the vow his son had made years ago, that one day he would win the World Cup for Brazil. So the moral of the story is sometimes the greatest victory is built on poverty, doubt, and the pain of losing someone you love. And even when you win the world, your heart still remembers the tears that got you there.